All right, let's finish up meditation 6. Remembering that where Descartes wants to end up is both with I would imagine, a certainty that material things exist, and also that we can know things about them. Not that any particular thing that we may know about them is absolutely certain, but that we can be certain of some things. Let's start on page 157, about a third of the way down the page. He says, "Therefore, merely because I know with certitude that I exist, and because, in the meantime, I do not observe that aught necessarily belongs to my nature, or essence beyond my being a thinking thing, I rightly conclude that my essence consists only in my being a thinking thing." That is, Descartes is essentially mental substance, or a substance whose whole essence or nature is merely thinking. And although I may, or rather, as I will shortly say, although I certainly do possess a body, see how he's getting back there, with which I am very closely conjoined, which of course brings its own problems, because dualism, the idea that there is mental substance and physical substance, is somehow in the living person joined. That is, we ourselves are both substances, we are both mental and physical. And although I may, or rather, nevertheless, because on the one hand I have a clear and distinct idea of myself, insofar as I am only a thinking and unextended thing, and as on the other hand I possess a distinct idea of body, insofar as it is only an extended and unthinking thing, it is certain that I, that is, my mind, by which I am what I am, is entirely and truly distinct from my body and may exist without it. Pretty good exposition there of Descartes' dualism. That is, there's a thinking substance, me, the thinking thing, and there is extended unthinking substance, body, and these are the two basic substances or types of being that make up the two of dualism. And about this unthinking extended substance, he says on page 158, "I perceive that they are distinct from myself as modes are from things. I remark likewise certain other faculties, as the power of changing place, of assuming diverse figures, and the like, that cannot be conceived, and cannot therefore exist any more than the preceding, apart from a substance in which they inhere. It is very evident, however, that these faculties of changing place, the things that we normally associate with physical things, that these faculties, if they really exist, must belong to some corporeal or extended substance, since in their clear and distinct concept there is contained some sort of extension but no intellection at all." And I have a very clear idea of the basic attributes of physical substance. And they don't apply to me as thinking substance. They seem to be specifically about physical substances. And this is a very strong belief that Descartes says we all have. But at the bottom of page 158, the key move. "But as God is no deceiver," we've established that, "it is manifest that he does not of himself and immediately communicate those ideas to me, nor even by the intervention of any creature in which their objective reality is not formally but only eminently maintained, for as he has given me no faculty whereby I can discover this to be the case, but on the contrary, a very strong inclination to believe that those ideas arise from corporeal objects, those basic ideas of physical things like changing shape and changing location in space, I do not see how he could be vindicated," he's talking about God, "from the charge of deceit, if in truth they proceeded from any other source, or were produced by other causes than corporeal things, and accordingly it must be concluded that corporeal objects exist. Nevertheless, they are not perhaps exactly such as we perceive by the senses, for their comprehension by the senses is in many instances very obscure and confused. But it is at least necessary to admit that all which I clearly and distinctly conceive as in them, that is, generally speaking, all that is comprehended in the object of speculative geometry really exists external to me." Okay, so he's there, except one more step. The things of the world exist, but my particular thoughts or opinions about them, what's the status of those? Well, bottom of 159 he says, "But there is nothing which that nature," and that nature is now God, right? that nature teaches me more expressly or more sensibly than that I have a body, which is ill affected when I feel pain, and stands in need of food and drink when I experience sensations of hunger and thirst, etc., and therefore I ought not to doubt, but that there is some truth in these informations. That is, that Descartes realizes or states that he is both body and mind, and that his body feels certain things, sensations of pleasure and pain, hunger and thirst, and all sorts of things that seem to indicate to him what he needs to do with his body, like drink and eat when he's hungry and thirsty. And then once again, it would be too much of a deception on the part of God if these things didn't in some way or another relate specifically to the conditions of the external world, so that he knows that corporeal things exist, and he knows that some of the information, at least, we get about them through our senses must be true, otherwise we really couldn't live. And there is a long, to end Meditation 6, a long essay on possible connection between the brain and the rest of the body and thought and things like that. But how do we end up here at the end? He says on page 168, I ought no longer to fear that falsity may be met with in what is daily presented to me by the senses. And I ought to reject all the doubts of those bygone days, which were like yesterday, as hyperbolical and ridiculous, especially the general uncertainty respecting sleep, which I could not distinguish in the waking state, for I now find a very marked difference between the two states. Basically, that dreams are incoherent, that we can't remember previous dreams when we're dreaming something immediately the way that we can remember previous waking experience when we're having waking experience. And these things are, again, backed up. They're not proved absolutely. In fact, you can't prove the existence of an external world. We inhabit the external world. We don't. Not something we could establish the way that we could prove something in physics or geometry. We have a very strong disposition, obviously, to believe in this world that we live in, but we can't prove it. So can we be certain of it? Well, we can be about as certain of it as we can be of anything that's not immediately obvious. Why, at the end of the day? Well, page 169 at the end, for since God is no deceiver, it necessarily follows that I am not herein deceived. And very strongly does the final conclusions, very strongly do the final conclusions of the Meditations rely on a God who created us, gave us the faculties, and who is no deceiver, so that although we may not have absolute proof of something, if we conceive of it clearly and distinctly,